Hi there, you're listening to Arcsoncompod, the Archie Sonic comic podcast. I'm your host Nathan, and together we'll be experiencing the highs, the lows and the downright weirds of the Archie Sonic the comic series. This week we'll run to issue 9 of the series, and we'll be beginning with this issue's cover. Before getting on to the main part of the cover, I just want to say I've noticed Robotnik in a mini panel beneath the price, and he's holding a cane with a magic 8-ball thing on top. I remember that. I swear that was like in the first issue even, and I'm quite surprised and interested to see it's come back again. The main focus, however, below the comic title, is not one, but two Sonics racing down from either side of the cover, towards Sally at the bottom, who is potentially about to be crushed by a safe from Acme Safe Company. She cries out that she's seeing double, but if you look closer, the two Sonics are actually pretty different. On the left is the Sonic we all know, whereas on the right it's a very obviously an evil mechanic counterpart. Not Metal Sonic, however, as I don't think he was officially made yet. It's just a clunkier robot Sonic that looks a bit closer to the original, albeit with sharp teeth and bladed shoes. In the bottom right we get told what we're dealing with, as the comic warns us not to miss the saga of Pseudo Sonic, so I guess that's going to be our story this week. In the top right we also have Tails in the distance, with the casual, "Why not? I've got two tails." So it's good to see he's not concerned about the evil Sonic doppelganger, I suppose. With that covered, we can begin the comic, and page 1 lets us know that the cover was spot on with the title, unlike the whole Olympic Trials and Errors story, as we begin with part 1 of Pseudo Sonic. We begin with Robotnik, as seems to be the case for an awful lot of the comics that's ostensibly about Sonic. He's using a pointing stick to jab at a picture of Sonic on a projection screen, as he declares he knows everything about his hated rival. Unfortunately, most of the information here is in squiggles, though we do get his address. Great Forest. A bit vague, but at least they tried. Robotnik rolls up the projection screen with a raptor flap 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 flap, which, yet again, is some absolutely fantastic onomatopoeia. He explains that he's used all of his knowledge to create, and he knows he said this before, but this time he really means it, the ultimate evil robot. We're finally introduced to Pseudo Sonic, a robotic Sonic that's a pretty good likeness aside from the sharp teeth, a few obvious bolts and joints, and looking generally evil. This fake Sonic announces, "At your service, O great and overweight one." A nice little rhyme there that gets us straight into another weight-related insult for the Doctor within the first couple of pages. We discover, at last, that Robotnik definitely doesn't have an issue with this. In fact, he commends Pseudo Sonic on knowing how to properly address his superiors. He goes on to check his list for all of Pseudo Sonic's strengths, though does briefly get mixed up and gives us another interesting tidbit. This robot runs on 3500 AA batteries. I'm surprised Robotnik doesn't have a better energy source really, but maybe he buys his batteries in bulk and it just works out cheaper this way. Suddenly, Pseudo Sonic bursts forward, picking up Robotnik and running through a wall with him. Ah yes, Robotnik now realises, that was it. This robot's speed is equal to that of the hated hedgehog. Plus he can stop on a well, he doesn't quite get to say dime, unfortunately. He said stop, and so Pseudo Sonic did just that, leaving Robotnik to go flying off into the distance. Robotnik realises there may be still some bugs to iron out in this new robot, and holds up a literal iron to illustrate his point. A few little bugs are hopping around advising Pseudo Sonic to flee, but he says he'll flee when he's ready to and not to tick him off. I guess they realise they're already a couple of pages in and falling behind on their usual spectacularly high target for puns and wordplay. We move on to the Great Forest, where Antoine is guarding the secret entrance to Knothole. I'd worry that kind of gives away the location, but oh well. Sonic suddenly pops up through the false tree stump, the secret entrance swinging up and smacking Antoine in the back of the head. He chuckles while saying, "Hope that doesn't make his swollen head any worse." Antoine's toupee, because I give up, it really must be a toupee now, is almost knocked off too, though he grabs it and readjusts it while explaining that he's on guard duty. He asks where Sonic is going, but Sonic refuses to explain before zooming off, at such a speed that Antoine is knocked over yet again. Soon enough Sonic is in a meadow and picking flowers when he approached by Betty Butterfly? Don't think I've ever heard of them mentioned before. Surely this has got to be one of the most obscure characters ever. Betty wants to know what Sonic's doing in her meadow, and he explained that he's picking a bouquet. Betty doesn't mind, but wonders who would want a bunch of poison sumac blossoms. And apparently they don't, judging by the horror on Sonic's face, as he drops the flowers and jumps up with a "What?" I think this moment might even be the most animated I've seen anyone's face in the whole thing so far. It's a bit goofy, but I think it works. Sonic starts desperately scratching as he realises how allergic he is to the flowers, while Betty warns him that scratching will only make things worse. Betty breaks the fourth wall here and offers to block our view as it's getting a little gross. And I'm glad she moves in the end, just purely because front-facing Betty is kind of nightmare fuel. This is the top right of page 4 if you have access to it, though don't say you weren't warned if you do go to take a look for yourself. As she moves, we get a look at the swollen Sonic, which is just what it sounds like. A giant swollen stomach covered in hives after scratching thanks to his allergies. Meanwhile, we find the shadowy figure of Sonic approaching the entrance to Knothole. Antoine warns Sonic about ignoring the curfew, to which he responds with a "Gesundheit," and finally steps out of the shadows to reveal to us readers that he is, in fact, the evil and robotic Pseudo Sonic. Antoine dismisses the joke about his response to the word curfew and says, "Very funny. I suppose you'd also laugh if one of Robotnik's robots discovered how to reach our headquarters." Which, well, they kind of have, even if Antoine doesn't realise it. Did they really need to sneak around like this, though? It seems like Robotnik knew where the entrance was anyway. Also, before we move on, there's a sign for the freedom fighters on the lid of the secret entrance. All freedom fighters must wash limbs before entering or leafing the tree stump to Knothole. That leafing there is their pun, by the way, not me mispronouncing it. And the note is simply signed Management. I'm curious as to why they have to wash limbs, but I don't think we'll get an answer. I think the note's just there to squeeze in yet another little bit of wordplay. Down in Knothole itself we see Bunny thanking Tails for sweeping all the hair out of her hairdressing shop. She looks oddly evil here, but I don't think she's supposed to. Just something funny I happen to notice. Tails says, "Hair today, gone tomorrow, Miss Rabot." I'm not sure if you're supposed to pronounce the T in Rabo or Rabot or not, you know. I've seen discussions about it online that perhaps it was originally Rabo with a silent T, and people started pronouncing the T after she was partly roboticised. If you've got an opinion on it, do feel free to comment or let me know what you think of the matter. Root is complaining that both Sonic and Antoine are late, but Sally tells him that she can hear them coming. First down is Antoine, who tells Sonic to stop pushing as he rushes into the hideout. Everyone's expecting Sonic next, though the first to react to his arrival is Tails as he announces it's Son. In the background, Buddy's confused about what he said, saying, "Son, don't you mean son?" as she suddenly realises something's wrong as well. A lot of them look worried and panicked, but Tails' reaction is just priceless when he gasps. It's so perfectly over the top and really looks like a meme template rather than a genuine reaction. Tails finally announces what they've all realised. It isn't Sonic at all, it's a robotic look-alike. Antoine is hiding after realising he's allowed a robot into their midst, while Pseudo Sonic pulls out a microphone attached to his hip and contacts Robotnik so he can deliver the coordinates to Knothole. With that, part 1 ends, with a robot inside Knothole and the real Sonic nowhere to be seen. There might be some tension here if we weren't inevitably going to go straight on to part 2 in the next page. As part 2 begins, Robotnik asks what we're all thinking. How did Pseudo Sonic find the hideout so quickly? Surprisingly, we actually get an answer. Pseudo Sonic explains that it was simple, while calling him "Oh, keeper of the spare tyre," to make sure we've got yet another weight-related insult for the Doctor. It turns out that he simply sped around the Great Forest at super speed until he found Antoine standing guard and duped him into revealing the answer. See? I told you having a guard outside a secret entrance was a bad idea. Everyone looks angry or disappointed with Antoine while he tries to explain himself. It was dark after all, and Pseudo Sonic was drawn in silhouette. Oh, Antoine, I don't think breaking the fourth wall is going to get you out of trouble here. And we also have an editor's note talking about Antoine blaming their artist for his mistake. Oh dear, looks like even the editor's turning on him now. Robotnik demands the coordinates and grabs his memo pad. But the moment Pseudo Sonic starts giving the information, the communication begins glitching out before switching to a technical difficulties standby screen. Robotnik can't believe how close he came, and looks utterly dismayed as he wonders what's going on. He paid his cable bill and everything. Much like before with Sonic and Tails, Robotnik here has a lot of emotion on his face. Whoever's drawing this issue is doing a great job of making it cartoony and really emotive. In fact, I was so impressed, I've gone back and I've checked the cover. Pencils were done by Dave Manak, so good job Dave, that's some great work. We discover that the interruption to the signal was thanks to Tails of all people. He's using a trick Sonic taught him. By dragging his tails around, he starts creating a field of static electricity. It seems it isn't just interfering with the communications either. The bot outright overloads and stops functioning. It's good to see how well Tails can handle himself when the chips are down. Rotor wheels off the destroyed bot to analyse it in his shop, and we see a signboard above the entrance. It was Boomer's shop, but someone slapped on the label for Rotor over Boomer. I quite like they've acknowledged the name change here. The whole comic's starting to feel like it has some sense of continuity now. With all of this happening though, you might be wondering the same thing as Sally. Whatever happened to the real Sonic? Well, it seems he finally managed to crawl out of the poison sumac patch. He's still itching like crazy though, and is trying to scratch, but it's not enough. He really needs to get home fast. He tries a Sonic spin, but he's too worn down from his attempts to escape the poison sumac. He lands on his face, exhausted, and starts to slowly crawl back towards the Great Forest because he's too vulnerable in the open. As if things couldn't get worse, Robotnik comes upon our fallen hero, flying over in his Eggomatic after having triangulated the rough area of Pseudo Sonic's last call. Now he's stumbled upon the real Sonic, and he's defenceless, just how Robotnik likes his victims. Sonic was so close to the Great Forest too. You can see the welcome sign to the forest, which warns that the tree surgeons are prohibited. We jump back to the freedom fighters again, who seem to be having a much easier time of things than Sonic himself. Rose is convinced it was definitely Robotnik that built the robot, but that still doesn't tell them what happened to the real Sonic. Luckily, someone with information's turned up. Oh, it's Betty Butterfly again. Let's hope we don't get a front view of her again at least. She explains where Sonic's been, and also that he's a sitting hedgehog right now. We see Sonic slowly trying to crawl away from Robotnik and what appears to be a flamethrower coming from his Eggomatic. Robotnik's clearly enjoying himself here as he switches to a Spike's ball and tells Sonic that he's going to drop an amazing load on him. I think that's probably supposed to say an amazing load for the sake of the pun though. Sonic's too weak to escape, but someone else comes to rescue at the last moment. We see a blaster firing, but we don't know who it is. All we know is that they've overheard enough to make a quip of their own. You forgot to say please, blubberbolts. There's a third weight insult within the first story. They're really going all in here. Before I tell you though, who do you think it is that blasted Robotnik here? I'll let you think it over for a moment. My first guess was a rebuilt and reprogrammed Pseudo Sonic, but it seems not. Nor was it Rotor with the new weapon he'd made. No, our hero here was, at least in my opinion, probably the best of the freedom fighters, Bunny. After blasting the Eggomatic to pieces, she hops over and grabs Robotnik, ready to ring his southern belle, as she puts it. Sonic looks understandably happy to see she's come to his rescue, and interestingly Robotnik seems stunned by her appearance. It seems like he didn't know they had a half-roboticized freedom fighter. Bunny casually picks up Robotnik to show off her strength, leaping away while carrying him back towards Robotropolis. Upon arriving, she throws him, letting him bounce across the floor and back towards Robotnik Inc. Notably, it's Inc. without a K and with a C this time, so I guess they changed that from before as well. Feels like they've made a lot of little fixes in this issue, and I'm really happy to see it. I'm sure there's some I've missed as well. Bunny says she could do it all night, but it's past Robotnik's bot time, and yells, "Off you go, fat boy!" I guess that maybe counts as that fourth weight insult this issue. Bunny returns to help Sonic out, as she even has a way to help with his rash from his allergic reaction. Her Aunt Lulu May's ointment. Made with cloves, kudzu root, brambleberry pit, eye of newt, and who knows what else. Sonic is grossed out and mentioned that sometimes the cure's worse than the disease, but still accepts her help. The ointment seems to be getting sprayed out of Bunny's bionic arm too, so I guess she's more than just strong limbs and a pretty face. Soon enough, Sonic and Bunny are heading back to Knothole, just as Rotor is taking out the trash. Sonic asks if he's missed anything, but Rotor assures him nothing really happened when he's not about. Sonic seems unsurprised and mentions he's pretty hard to replace, while Betty flaps past and suggests he shouldn't be so sure. After all, while Sonic might not know it, we know they actually did deal with a robotic replacement for him for a little while he was away. The story ends with the barely functional scraps of Pseudo Sonic in the trash can, communicating with Robotnik, asking if enough people writing in might get him a sequel. You know what? I think that might have been my favourite story so far. It was fun, the rest of the cast got a chance to shine, there were some really good faces and great art, referenced a couple of little fixes they'd made, such as changing Rotor's name to Boomer. Best of all, both Tails and Bunny got a chance to really show off their strengths. I hope you all enjoyed as much as I did. Remember, you can always drop an email or a comment, and I might even read them out in future episodes. I'm not expecting anything to top that strong start, but let's press on with the comic regardless and see if we can maintain this momentum, shall we? Next up is a one-page story titled Two Thor Consequences. We're in Robotropolis again, as Orbinaut tells Robotnik that the latest machine is coming out of the machine. The two rush off to check it out, with Robotnik exclaiming with excitement that he hopes it'll be powerful enough to destroy Sonic, while Orbinaut agrees and calls him Old Keeper of the Blubber. Yet another weight insult, losing count from this issue alone. As they arrive, we get their reactions to the robot before seeing it for ourselves. They come to a skidding halt, and when Orbinaut does this, his floating spike balls all spin around and clack together in front of him, which is frankly an incredible little bit of attention to detail. Robotnik cannot stand what's been made, however, and orders the nearby SWAT bot to destroy the horror at once. What is it that could be so terrible, you might wonder? Robotnik explains it himself. Even he's not cruel enough to manufacture a dentist bot. The badnik is a humanoid with a giant tooth for a head, inviting them to take a seat and ensuring them it won't hurt a bit. It's a very unique design, if nothing else. With that, we finish this little mini-story. Nothing much to it, as is usually the case with these one-page stories, but fun all the same, with a very unusual and unique bot, and a little glimpse into the upper limits of Robotnik's evilness. Next up, it's yet another one-page mini-story, this one titled Quick Sketch. It looks like we'll be getting taught how to draw Sonic this issue, thanks to many letters requesting it. Not really any characters or story here, but these lessons are still a pretty cool thing to offer. We start with a circle for the head, followed by a smaller oval beneath it for the body. Next up, you use basic lines to indicate where you want the arms and legs positioned, and then draw in the basic shapes of his hands, feet, nose and quills, before moving on to develop his limbs, eyes, ears and quills. With that, your Sonic drawing is nearly zoom. That's it. Suddenly he's come to life and zoomed off the page. Don't worry though, apparently that happens all the time. So if you had the same problem at home, fear not. Guess you'll just have to try again. Now it's time for us to move on to another new story, this one titled What's the Point? We start with Sonic speeding along through the forest, carrying a bouquet of flowers. He's picked a bunch of forget-me-nots for Sally's birthday, but comes to a screeching halt as he realises he's made a terrible mistake. He ran too fast, and now Sally's forget-me-nots are forget about it. Temporarily defeated, Sonic reclines under a tree as he wonders how to proceed. Sally's party's already going on, but now he doesn't have a gift to give her. He wishes he'd used his head, and gets the chance moments later when a red chicken-looking kind of thing drops out of the tree and lands on his head. Sonic recognises the bird immediately, or at least recognises its species. Who knew he was so knowledgeable on that front? Apparently it's a Mobian needlebird, half bird, half porcupine. That explains why they made it look so gristly in the illustration, I suppose. Sonic mentions that the species was thought to be extinct after Robotnik turned them all into robots, so it seems he's found a particularly rare bird, or rather, it found him after it fell out of the tree and hit him on the head. It appears injured too, after trying and failing to fly and falling out of the tree. Sonic decides the first thing this bird needs is food, and lists off a few ideas of what to feed it. A needle burger, perhaps, or pepperoni needle pizza. What about chicken needle soup? With his jokes out of the way, he comes up with a natural idea and zooms off to get some real food for the bird. When he returns, he's carrying a big bunch of berries, but warns the bird to watch out for the black one, because that's his nose. Bit of a dumb little joke, though it does make sense, given the berries are a similar shape and near to his nose. And I can't say I don't understand it. I'm sure I've said equally silly things to my pets in the past too. As the needlebird happily chomps down on the berries that Sonic's offered it, Sonic gets a great idea. Sally loves animals, so he'll name the bird Thorny and give it to her as a birthday present. He's convinced she'll be happy with it. Also, he looks weirdly happy and adoring of the needlebird here. It's just nice to see it's a gentler, more innocent side of the hero compared to everything you've seen up until this point. I guess caring for animals can really bring out a different side of people. Soon enough we find ourselves at Knothole, and it turns out Sonic's plans aren't quite working out. Sally warns Sonic to get the flying cactus plant out of there immediately. Sonic's stunned at her cruelty, especially when Thorny is injured and can't defend himself. So Sally explains her reasoning. This isn't the first cute little animal they found in the forest, it turns out, and every single time, helping them's been a terrible idea. First there was a friendly little beaver, who actually turned out to be a vicious Robotnik badnik, and we see the moment it turned on tails and ordered him to surrender. Next there's a little squirrel that Rota found, which turned out to be wearing a tracking device, thus nearly revealing Knothole location to Robotnik. Last, but certainly not least, there was a baby deer who turned out to be a bombardier. We see Antoine and Bunny running away as a deer-turned-fighter jet chases them down with rocket launcher. Wow, an exciting attack and a ridiculous pun. How did that not get its own story? I feel like we missed out on something there. Sally does seem to have some good points at least, as she explains that the freedom fighters can't afford to take in any more pets, because it's just far too petrifying. Sonic barely even reacts to her pun though, because he's just noticed that Thorny, the needlebird he brought in with him, has suddenly gone missing. As if Thorny hadn't already been unwelcome enough, he seems to have found his way into Sally's needleberry birthday cake. He's jumping down as Rota and Sally watch on and... well, that's it, they just kind of watch it happen. That's the last straw for Sally, who demands that Sonic get the bird-brained ball of bristles out of there. Sonic looks panicked as he rushes over to grab Thorny and follow his orders. Rota tries to reassure Sally it's fine and that he can bake another cake, and she thanks him for it, though she wants to go out and pick the berries herself to blow off some steam. Okay, Sally, I know it sucks, but this poor creature is clearly in need and doesn't know any better. Maybe try and rein it in a little. Getting this angry at a creature that doesn't know any better really isn't a good look. Back in the forest, Sonic's gently setting Thorny down somewhere high up, convinced he'll be safe. Both Sonic and Thorny look devastated having to part, and I really do feel bad for them here. I get why Sally's worried about a potential trap from Robotnik, but this bird seems genuinely in need. Surely there has to be a balance here, doesn't there? There's no time to think one through though, because Sonic's interrupted by a shriek from off-panel. Looks like there's somewhere else he needs to be now. On the next page we discover the source of this shriek. Sally has been captured. Bizarrely, the thing that's captured her here seems to be some kind of giant angry tree. We're not left confused for long though, as the comic shows us the mastermind behind this. And who else would it be but Robotnik yet again? Snively is reporting that one of Robotnik's forest traps has caught a freedom fighter, and Robotnik is pleased to hear it. In fact, he's even going to go and fetch the freedom fighter personally, announcing it will be a tremendous triumph before laughing at his own pun while Snively compliments it, though perhaps more out of fear than actually approving of the joke. We get a brief fourth wall break here as Sonic comes along to try and save us from the most obvious upcoming danger: bad tree puns. He manages to compile them all into one panel too. And in case you're not reading along, I'll give you all the puns together here. I don't want to go out on a limb, but I would like to get to the root of Sally's problem. I'd be a sap if I decided to leave. As far as that's concerned, I'll try to see the thing through. For sure. If not, I'll be pining and weeping. I'd much rather take a bow. Okay? Hopefully that came across being read out instead of written, but I think you get the idea of how overloaded the puns are there. Now, with that out of the way, Sonic invites us to carry on without any more bad tree puns in the way. So let's do just that. Getting back to the story, Sonic is racing along towards the source of the shriek. Turns out he even recognises the source. It was Sally. He comes to a halt, however, as he realises it sounds like she's in a tree, but he can't work out which one. He also drops another pun here about feeling like he's being stalked. But as an editor's note points out, shucks, that's a corn pun, not a tree pun. Really going all in on the puns here, huh? Suddenly a big tree hand comes down from above and snatches up Sonic. Or at least it tries to. It turns out Thorny, a needlebird friend from earlier, has come along to save the day at the last moment now his wings all better. Sonic seems not even realise that he was in danger when he got picked up, but right now he doesn't have time to worry about it. Instead he wants Thorny to help him save Sally, even if she was mean to him before. Thorny doesn't seem to hold a grudge though, I guess, because Sonic is immediately carried over to find Sally in the grip of the giant evil-looking tree. Sonic has Thorny release him and leaps at the tree with a sonic spin, literally disarming it to free Sally. She thanks him for his help, but she's still stuck in the grip of the now disembodied arm. Sonic can take a few minutes to pry her loose though, or could if he had the time. This comic's barely stopping for a break, because now Robotnik's turned up as well. He's holding the freeze ray, announcing it has a wide range, which leaves Sonic trapped between Sally who needs help and an armed Robotnik. Sonic makes his choice and starts trying to free Sally as quickly as he can, while Robotnik takes his time to mock their pitiful attempts at escape. Sally can't get loose from the giant tree hand, even if it isn't attached anymore, and Robotnik is taking aim. He tells them to hold their pose and say, "Robot!" But before he can pull the trigger, there's another interruption. Something swoops past and drops an egg on Robotnik's head, splattering over him and distracting him. He rushes to wipe it off because it's bad anyway, but especially bad given his cholesterol level. In case you hadn't already worked it out, it's Thorny who's responsible and he's not through yet. He starts shaking his tail, launching a bunch of needles at Robotnik. He lets out a yow before retreating, all the while hopping along and making noises of pain thanks to all the needles now in his body. Thanks to the distraction, Sonic is finally able to free Sally, and she even has the good grace to thank Thorny for his help as well. At least she seems to have realised a mistake from earlier, though I think an apology would be nice as well. As the story ends, they decide to also make Thorny an honorary freedom fighter, which is a nice way to wrap up. With that, we come to the end. How did you enjoy that story? It seemed like an awful lot happened in a short time, but I don't suppose it was a bad thing. It was interesting seeing a different side of Sonic here too, watching him caring for a small creature and trying to help it. It's a shame Sally seems so needlessly aggressive, but I suppose it can't be helped leading the freedom fighters. It must be a stressful job. And it's not like they didn't have bad experiences before now, so I guess I understand. On the next page, we have an all-new Sonic pin-up, and wow, who knew he was so buff? It's the Sonic we all know, at least above the neck, but the rest of the body is huge, muscular, and wearing nothing but black underwear. He very much looks like a wrestler posing here. We discover, of course, this isn't real though. It's actually a photo board of the carnival. Sonic's standing beside it now and quips, "From muscle bound to get muscles," which I don't entirely get as a joke, but sure, why not? And on that strange random joke, the comic comes to a close. What did you think of this issue? I think I made my feelings pretty clear, especially after the first story. It was great seeing the rest of the cast play their part, dealing with Pseudo Sonic all on their own. And although the second story wasn't quite as incredible as that, it was still great to see a softer side of Sonic. Whatever your own opinions were, do let me know, either by dropping a comment or sending me an email at arcsoncompod@gmail.com. That's arcsoncompod@gmail.com. Join me next week as we move on to issue 10, our first milestone issue. And in turn, I suppose, it's a big milestone episode for me as well. Here's hoping it's a good comic. Though judging by this week, I've got high hopes. Thanks again for listening along as we revisit these old comic books. Until next time, take care of yourselves and have a great week. Goodbye.